Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Flynn and I am the owner and maker of Flynn Sisters Boutique. And today we're going to be doing a glitter swirl slash marble hydrodip situation. I think you guys are really gonna love it. The only time I really like to do hydrodips is when I'm doing them over like some glitter or an already done swirl, because hydrodips really aren't my strong suit. So I'm going to show you my favorite technique for doing these, and I hope you enjoy the video. I'm going to have all the products that you see listed and linked down below in the description box. You might even find some discount codes for you there as well. And that's definitely enough chit chat for me. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, you guys, so as usual, I'm starting with a fully prepped and sanded cup. If you need some help with how to prep and paint your cups, I will post a really detailed video down below in the description box that'll help you out. I'm going to start by spraying my cup with a flat white prime paint. So this is just Rust-Oleum flat white prime and paint spray paint. And I'm going to get a decent coat, nothing too fancy. We really just want to get a nice base layer down for the colors we're going to be adding in next. And then as soon as that's dry, I'm going to be spray painting in a swirl pattern the lime green and the navy blue and a little bit of gray for the Seahawks colors, because this cup will be Seahawks themed. I am from Washington State and we're big fans of the Seahawks. So I'm going to start with what will be my focal color first, which in this case is the lime green. Then I'll add in the navy blue, and then we'll come in with a gray last. I don't really have a whole lot of rhyme or reason for how I'm doing this. It's definitely not a perfect swirl, and you can see that I added like small sections of color outside of the normal like pattern for a swirl, if that makes sense. Okay, very similar to how I would base paint a gypsy leopard tumbler design. All right, I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to use my heat gun to help speed that process up. I also want to get the surface of my cup warm, because when we go to apply the epoxy, which will act as the adhesive for our glitter, that epoxy is going to spread on a lot better if we have a warm surface to spread it onto. Okay, and we want to use very, very little epoxy. You do not want to pour the epoxy directly onto your tumbler because you're inevitably going to get too much. So just dip your finger in once and spread it on. I've mixed 5 milliliters of epoxy here, and I ended up using less than 1. Now we're ready to apply our glitter, and I'm using that spray paint as kind of a roadmap for where we're going to apply our colors. I'm going to start with my chunkiest cuts first. I have like 2 or 3 different size cuts for each color that I'm going to be using for this design. So for like the lime green, I have a chunky and a fine cut. For the navy blue, I have a chunky and a fine cut plus a slightly different shade. That's a square cut. And same thing for the silver or the gray. I'm going to start by really lightly sprinkling on the chunky glitter, because I don't want that to be like the main character of the show here. We just want that to add depth and interest to our swirl design. So I'm just putting like little bits on at a time. We're starting with a rough draft of our glitter layout, so we're not going to be letting it rip quite yet until we have a good idea of placement for all of our colors. I used Oscar for the chunky cut of my lime green color, and then I used Knife Hand for the chunky cut of my navy blue glitter. After I got that laid down very conservatively, I went in with my fine cuts, starting with Dress Blues for the fine cut navy. And again, we're still doing a very light coat of glitter here, nothing too crazy yet, because we want to be able to blend our next color in. Once I got that laid down, I went in with Kermit Wazowski and kind of blended it into the green sections. You want to make sure that you tap off the excess glitter between each color so you don't accidentally mix some in with the other stuff. So I've got a trash can next to me that I just aggressively tap off the excess with a pair of scissors before I move into the next color, especially when you're using two really contrasting colors like we are here. I have my hand up really high as I'm sprinkling in this lime green. I'm doing that because I'm going to get a wider fan on my glitter than if I were to be close up to get a more controlled lay of glitter. Okay, and then we're just going to get in the silver glitter next. This is Salty Beach from Peachy Olive Glitters. All the glitter colors I'm using today, of course, are Peachy Olive Glitters, and I will have them listed and linked down below. You'll also find a 10% off discount code for you there as well. All right, and then after I have all my fine cuts laid and I have like a good idea of where everything's going to go, that's when I'm going to start layering up and blending more to get more of that full coverage. This is me putting in a little bit of the silver chunky, which there really wasn't a whole lot of that. The silver chunky I'm putting in is Smolder, and the fine cut for the silver was Salty Beach, and I think I also used Oakenshield. I'm pretty sure I did. All right, and then here we are just layering on more of the fine glitters until we get the amount of coverage that we want, which obviously would be full coverage. This is salt water that I'm going in with. Again, you guys, I've got 2 to 3 cuts, sizes, and shades for each color that I'm using for my design so that we have a lot of depth, a lot of interest. It's not so flat with the swirl, and that is something that I really like to do with all of my glitter swirls, just to make them a little bit more special. All right, and so once I was done with my glitter, I set this on my rack to dry for about 2 to 3 hours. You shouldn't have to let this turn on your turner to dry because we use such a thin layer of epoxy that glitter is not going to move. Once my glitter was dry, I tapped off the excess really well, and then I applied my first layer of epoxy, which was 30 milliliters. I did not feel the need to seal my glitter because we have such a blended swirl, it's not really necessary for that glitter to really stay in place. I let that 30 milliliters of epoxy dry on my turner for about 4 to 6 hours before we moved on to the next step, which is going to be our marbling. I've got 30 milliliters of epoxy mixed here for this step, and I'm going to apply about half of that to our tumbler, maybe a little bit more. With the epoxy that I have left in my medicine cup, I'm going to mix in my colorants. I'm using a navy blue acrylic epoxy colorant, which I'll have linked down below. And I also mixed a little bit of black epoxy colorant into it just because it wasn't quite dark enough for what I wanted. So if you wanted to use navy acrylic paint, you could do that too, whatever you want to use. Or whatever colors you're working with, I guess. For the lime green, I used Arteza green apple acrylic paint and just a little bit. You don't want to add too much of these acrylic colorants because it will make your epoxy kind of stringy, which I kind of like sometimes. I know some people will think I'm crazy, but I like when it's a little stringier because I can get some really fine lines. I can get, some really thick lines. I just have more control that way. Anyway, once we have our colorants mixed in, I'm just going to kind of finger paint them onto my cup. If you need to change gloves between colors, you could do that, or you could do like I did and just use different fingers for different colors. All right, and this is very similar to how I would add colorants or micas to a gypsy swirl, okay? You guys have seen me do this a million times before. This is my favorite technique for marbling in different epoxy colorants, all right? And I'm not gonna use any heat on this today because I want no movement. All right, we want everything to stay in place. And after I have all of my colorants added to my tumbler, I'm just going to get a clean glove on and edit out any parts of that swirl that might look a little gloopy. So you would just kind of watch this and scoop out any sections that might got a little, you know, pooled up or too heavy or whatever. You just scoop that out with your finger and like wipe it off on the parchment paper down there below. Okay, and then once I'm happy with the placement of all my colorants, I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of silver chunky glitter. Again, just to add a little bit of interest and dimension, I guess. I don't know. And so I let that dry for about 4 to 6 hours, and then I turned my turner off and I let it sit for another 4 hours before we moved on to the next step. All right, so now that my tumbler's dry, I'm going to sand the top rim like I always do. We want to make sure that we do a pretty good job sanding before we move on to our next coat of epoxy for this. So I'm going to sand my rim down really well. I've got a 60 grit sanding block. I'm going to knock down any like sharp bits or like chunky pieces that might be sticking out a little too much. And I want to do a pretty good job at sanding the rim there on the bottom as well, but keep in mind we only have a couple layers of epoxy over that glitter, so we don't want to sand down too aggressively and risk, you know, sanding down past our glitter. So just be careful. Once I've got this all sanded down, I'm going to rinse it off with some dish soap and water and dry it off with some paper towels. And then I applied another coat of epoxy to my tumbler. This coat was 30 milliliters of epoxy. I don't think I used all of it, but I really do want to get a perfectly smooth coat before we move on to our hydro dip. You're going to notice that your tumbler is really lumpy and bumpy after that marbling stage with the acrylic paints and stuff. So that's why we're doing this coat of epoxy. Okay, and if after you do this coat of epoxy, you still find that you need to do a good amount of sanding or it's just not quite smooth, I would advise going in with another coat before you do the marbling with the hydro dip. Sometimes the hydro dip does not turn out exactly how you want it to, and you have to remove it all with acetone. So if we had a bunch of sanded areas on our tumbler, you're gonna have a hard time getting the spray paint out of those sanded areas. So really what we're looking for before we move into the hydro dip is like darn near final coat status. Like everything should be totally smooth, almost as smooth as it would be before we apply a decal. All right, so just keep that in mind. My tumbler is nice and smooth and it's been drying for at least 12 hours and I'm ready to do my hydro dip. I've got some like room temp water here in my bucket. This is just a large 5-gallon bucket that I got from Lowe's, and I have the water about 4 inches up from the top, and I'm spray painting in white, true navy, and gray. These are all colors from Rust-Oleum. They're all flat spray paints. I don't think it really matters if you use gloss or flat. And I'm just spraying 4 dots of each color and kind of layering up about 2 or 3 times between all 3 colors, okay? So like spray, 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 okay? And spray, spray, spray with the next color until we have a good buildup there on the surface layer of our water. Then I will dunk my cup in using like a swirl motion in the same direction that my marbling is made in, if that makes sense. Okay, so the swirl with the paint should match the swirl that we did with our colorants earlier. I'm really lucky I got this on the first try. Usually I have to remove all this with some acetone and paper towels and try again, but I really like our results. Okay, that's going to dry right away, and we're just going to dab off some of the excess water with a paper towel. And I've got some acetone and rubbing alcohol here. I'm going to use some acetone and a paper towel to remove large sections of my paint that just don't look quite right. It might look a little muddled. Maybe I didn't get, you know, a lot of saturation of color there. And I'm just going to remove that section of paint with some rubbing alcohol and acetone. Remember that the acetone is going to take off large sections very quickly, and the rubbing alcohol will take off, like, how do I say this, like lighter coats of paint, but leave behind the more saturated swirls of paint. I hope that makes sense. Think of like how we would do like a geode paint technique, okay? So here I am just removing some of the sections that I don't really like to reveal the glitter and swirl design underneath. And this is a really great way to get good results from a hydro dip, even if you didn't like it. Okay, so if you're not really good at hydro dips like me, being able to do this really helps clean everything up and get really beautiful results almost every time. If you didn't like your hydro dip the first time, just go in with some paper towels and some acetone and wipe it all off and start again. Okay, it's not a big deal. I'm using 91% rubbing alcohol, and again, that rubbing alcohol will be strong enough to remove lighter portions of paint, but not the darker portions of paint, which really makes this beautiful effect of like the glitter being revealed in the same organic pattern as the pattern in your hydro dip. All right, so as soon as we're done with that, we can put on our final coat of epoxy. If you wanted to add a decal, you would add it after this layer of epoxy dries, okay? I've got 20 milliliters of epoxy mixed here, and I'm just going to spread it on like I would any other coat. And I let this dry for about 4 to 6 hours before I put on my real final coat, and that was it. We were done. So that's it for this tutorial. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and if you liked my video, please be sure to give us a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I upload new videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. And a big thank you to all of our Flynn Sisters exclusive members. Thank you for your pledge. Your support means the world to our channel. If you love this video, you could check out our last video here. Also be sure to find us on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and of course subscribe for all our new videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.